of you out there have ever played a video game? Okay, probably a lot of you, right? If you're on YouTube, like you probably do social media, you probably do other modern fun forms of entertainment, so you've probably played a video game before. So if you've played a video game before, you're probably at least vaguely familiar with the concept of adaptive music in video games. Now, if you've never heard that term before, or maybe like you don't know what it is at all, or you just like need a little bit of a refresher on it, there are tons and tons of videos that are out there on YouTube talking about this exact concept of adaptive music. I'm not going to go into it a ton on this current video because that's not quite the angle I'm going for, but I would highly encourage you to go listen to the many wonderful videos that are out there that really do this topic justice. But to give a brief explanation without you having to go watch a 10-minute video, I will give Wikipedia's definition of adaptive music, which reads, in video games, adaptive music, also called dynamic or interactive music, is background music whose volume, rhythm, or tune changes in response to specific events in video games. So you've probably seen this in like most, especially like single player type video games. I don't think multiplayer video games don't tend to have this as much because there's way too much else going on. But adaptive music is that kind of concept of, you know, maybe you walk into a different section of the video game and the music changes, or maybe you pick something up and that changes the music. And it's usually more than just playing like a little jingle or like just suddenly making a switch. Adaptive music tends to be more specifically how the music really makes a smooth transition or adds in another layer because you made a different choice in how you played out your actions in the video game. But did you know that this core underlying theme of like what adaptive music is, this idea that the music can change based on various actions, did you know that was already a concept that existed long before video games ever even existed? I would say at least maybe about 30 years at minimum before video games even came into existence. And it existed through this idea called aleatoric music. Now, I'm not saying that aleatoric music and adaptive music are the exact same thing. However, if you dig into it and you kind of do a lot of comparison of the two, you will find that the underlying concept of how they function and what they are is almost the exact same thing. So if we're gonna compare these two, we've understood adaptive music, but what is aleatoric music? So I found one definition of aleatoric music from like the masterclass website. I just really liked how they phrased it a lot, so I'm gonna read that one off here. So aleatoric music is a form of music that is subject to improvisation or structured randomness. It relies on a composer making chance decisions while writing the piece, or more commonly, a performer improvising while playing a piece. Also known as aleatory music, indeterminate music, or chance music. It combines scripted instructions from a composer, typically via sheet music, and improvisation by the musician playing the piece. So aleatoric music came out of this time period in about the mid-20th century when composers were really interested in trying to solve how or if music could be composed by chance or randomly. So rather than writing down music with a specific intention, trying to really get it to sound a specific way, was it possible for you to write music, or at least how does the music sound if you were to compose it by chance? You might be familiar with some of the composers that kind of came out of this movement, the most famous of which is John Cage, but also there were other notable composers of this movement, such as Pierre Boulez and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. I cannot get through this sentence, so we're gonna call that good enough. And from the movement of aleatoric music, three main methods kind of came out as to how music could be considered to be by chance. They don't really have any specific names, so in order to better identify them and for you to remember them after this video, I've given them my own fun nicknames. So yeah. So the first method is what I like to call kind of like the rolling the dice method. In this method, the thing that is random is the way you compose the music. So I call it the rolling the dice method because when you think of it, it's easy to think of it being composed by a composer rolling a dice. So you ask yourself, okay, what's my note gonna be? You roll a dice that tells you, the number that you get tells you what note you're gonna get. Then you say, okay, maybe how long is this note gonna be held? You roll a dice and that number tells you how long you're gonna hold your note. Then the last thing you might say is, well, maybe what octave do I want this note to be in? So you roll the dice and that tells you what octave the note should be in. The problem that many composers found with working with this method after a period of time was that once you write the piece, it's no longer really by chance anymore. It's no different than any other piece that you've composed. It's just that like you wrote it really randomly and then now it sounds the same as all your other ones. So they wanted to do more and expand more upon how can we make a piece of music really truly by chance. Which leads us on to the second method, what I like to call the choose your own adventure method, because it kind of does function a little bit like a choose your own adventure kind of book. And there's no like strict rules as to exactly how this can play out, but with the choose your own adventure method, composers more write down music along with a set of directions on how to perform the music. But the key thing is the way the composer writes out the direction gives the performer, when they're performing, a lot of flexibility as to how they want the final product to sound. So you could take this kind of choose your own adventure piece and give it to one person and then give it to another person and tell them both to play the piece, and they may have two very different results based on how they chose to interpret the directions or based on the way they chose to follow the directions. That's kind of the whole point of this. So part of the chance is, yes, you can make some chance decisions in the composing process, but then you also give the chance to the performers as well and say, okay, well, if I tell you to perform this, you may perform it one way. I can give it to another person and tell them to perform it another way. And we can get two different results and it kind of ends up being random. The other thing you can also do with this method is you can give it to one performer, tell them to perform it, but then later on give that same performer the same piece and it will not be the same as the way they chose to do it the first time because of how the directions are often laid out. And the third method is what I like to kind of call the putting it through several layers of Google Translate method. And that's because this is the weirdest out of all of them, probably the most uncommon. I don't tend to see a lot of pieces that are performed with this specific intention in mind, but it does exist and it is out there and it is interesting to talk about for the purposes of understanding aleatoric music. So in this method, the composer often doesn't even write music in the way we typically think of as like composing it on a staff. It's usually that the composer will write out the music either through use of just symbols or through written words and directions, and it kind of gives a vague general idea of what the performer is supposed to do. The performer on their side then looks at said images or pictures or directions and is supposed to interpret and figure out whatever the heck that's supposed to mean. There's no wrong answer for the performer because the composer didn't even write a right answer to begin with. So I call this method the putting it through several layers of Google Translate because it's kind of like if you've ever watched those videos where somebody's like, I put a recipe through Google Translate 50 times. You know how like they put in a recipe and they kind of let Google Translate mess it up a whole bunch or just change it up a whole bunch, and then they get the recipe at the end and then you're just supposed to kind of look at it and go, this isn't an actual recipe, but I'm just supposed to vaguely figure out what this is supposed to mean. That's kind of why I compared it to that, is because the composer kind of writes something out and kind of says, here you go, shoves it off onto the performer. The performer gets it and says, this isn't usually what I think of as music, but I'm gonna kind of just put my own interpretation on this and see how it goes. So in comparing aleatoric music to video game adaptive music, we're really going to focus mostly on that second method that I described, the choose your own adventure, where the composer writes music and then gives some directions alongside of it, and then the performer has a little bit of choice and freedom as to how that final product of music works. And I know I kind of gave a brief overview on that second method of aleatoric music, so in order to better understand how that exact method functions, I'm going to bring out my old assignment I had to do on this very topic for my general music elementary school class and share it all with you. Is this an excuse to show off my work that I did in college? Yes, it is. But you can't deny that the theming on this is very appropriate. So I guess to kind of explain what happened here is, so I had a general music class in college where we had two versions of it. We had one that was geared towards teaching music to elementary school students and one that was geared towards teaching middle school and high school students. So this is my binder full of projects that I had to do on, I can show you, take out this piece, and this is my whole binder on all the projects and other things that I had to do. This was my final, is creating this binder, compiling everything for lessons that I had to teach, pretend to teach to elementary school students. Didn't actually teach elementary school students because we just ended up teaching each other. So most of the time that class was just a whole bunch of fully grown adults go to class and pretend to be elementary school students the entire time while their peers teach them a lesson. But one of the projects that we had to do was we had to create a game teaching aleatoric music. So I bring this up here because I figure if I can successfully pretend to teach elementary school students, and I can probably teach a bunch of people who are watching this on YouTube. So the way this game functioned is, let me read my directions here. So it says, count off by tens to figure out which number you'll start with, because there's 10 instructions on here. When the teacher gives the signal, perform the action that matches your number. Listen for when the teacher tells you to switch to the next number. The song is done when you've done all 10 actions. So the whole point of this game was to, instead of having kids perform music, which is what would normally happen in aleatoric music, the actions that the kids chose were a stand-in for performing music, because it's a little bit easier to get a whole bunch of elementary school kids to perform actions than it is to teach them how to play an instrument. So there was 10 different actions on here, and the kids were supposed to follow each of the actions. Well, the kids, it was the college students. So the students were supposed to read the action, read the direction, and then we're supposed to interpret that how they thought they were supposed to do it. So everybody would start off on a different number, then the teacher would tell them when to switch to the next number, and then once everybody had gotten through all the actions, then the song was all done. So in case you're curious, I will read off my different directions that I have on here. So I called this game Nintendo Power Shuffle in reference to, yes, the classic Nintendo Power magazine. And I based each of the actions off of various Nintendo characters. So the first one says, show off your strength, do a falcon punch. The second one says, you've turned into a Pikachu. Walk up to your friend saying, Pika Pika. 3 says, Link just gave you his ocarina. Play a song to warp somewhere. Number 4, you've entered World 1-1. Jump like Mario while saying, let's-a go. Number 5, you're now wearing Samus's armor. Sit on the ground like you're in the morph ball. Now, quick note, I remember reading through this when I pulled this back out and going, Samus doesn't sit in her morph ball. Why did I write sit in your morph ball? Why didn't I write roll around? And then I remembered that this was supposed to be for elementary school students, and then if I had them all rolling around on the floor, I was just gonna be a bad time. Number 6 says, you've joined the Donkey Kong family. Show it off by acting like a monkey. Number 7, you're getting mighty hungry. Act like Kirby and eat everything in sight. So number 8 says, look out, it's Waluigi. Walk up to people doing your best Waluigi wah. So I will now give this moment for everybody to do their best Waluigi wah. Good job. Number 9 says, act like Bowser and stomp around the room. And then number 10 says, uh-oh, you're getting really sleepy. Fall asleep like Jigglypuff. So yeah, basic just like little kid actions. It's a really fun game. It was really fun for everybody to do mine and for me to do everybody else's. But as you can see in these directions, it's just a really basic action. There's nothing in the directions that says, oh, you have to do this to this degree, or you have to do this specific exact way. When it says something like, sit on the ground like you're in a morph ball, that can look different for a lot of different kids. One kid might just kind of sit down and crouch on the ground. One kid might just completely tuck his head in and cover his arms with his head. Another kid might just kind of like sit on the floor because maybe they're not familiar with Samus. There's lots of different ways that a kid could interpret these directions. And that's kind of the whole point, right? There's not one right way to do it. Maybe there's several ways to do it wrong, but there's a lot of different ways to do it correctly. The other element of this is the teacher. So when the teacher comes in and says, switch to the next one, how do you know when the teacher is going to say, switch to the next one? I don't even think the teacher would know exactly when they decide to say, switch to the next one, other than they just go, looks like the kids have had enough fun on this action, let's move on to the next one. But if the teacher were to do this several lessons in a row, it's not like the teacher's counting out, all right, 30 seconds, now you're done. Because the teacher doesn't even get directions on something like that. So each and every single element that goes into this game can change wildly. You could have the same group of kids performing the same game over and over and over again, and it's not going to look the same way twice, particularly if you add in a whole bunch of different factors about maybe what time of day are these kids performing it at, how hungry are these kids, have they just come back from recess, you know? There's lots of different elements that can change. And who is in charge of all that changes? Well, a lot of it is the kids, and obviously the teacher, because the teacher's participating, but anybody who's a part of this performance. If I gave this to somebody else and didn't choose to be the teacher role, I would have no control in terms of how this piece would look when it's being performed. And that's kind of the whole point of aleatoric music. So, what does that have to do with adaptive music? Well, think about how adaptive music works in video games. A composer composes music, but they compose bits and pieces of music that are supposed to be performed while the video game is being played. But does the composer have any say, and can they step in and say, this part of this section is supposed to play for exactly this long, then this piece kicks in, and then this part comes in over here, and you add this layer on during this? They can add in the layers and the elements and say this plays when this happens. But who chooses when that action happens? It's the player, the person playing the game. The person playing the game is acting as the role of the performer. They're choosing how to input certain actions. They're choosing where to go and what they want done. The composer has zero say over that. The composer has composed the music, given directions as to when certain elements are supposed to be played, and then given it off to the performer or the player. So you, as the player of the video game, are then acting as both the performer of the piece that the composer has written, as well as doing a little bit of your own composing. You're choosing your own adventure, you're choosing the direction as to how the music is going to be played out for everybody to hear. Also, if you sit down and play that video game more than once, it's highly unlikely that that soundtrack will sound the same if you've played it over and over and over and over again. You could stay in a room a little bit longer than you did before. You could pick up a potion that you had never picked up before. You could find a new secret that adds on a whole other layer to the music, depending on how the composer has decided to add on different layers onto adaptive music. So now you can go forth and play your video games and the music in the video games and appreciate it in a new way, and kind of maybe pay attention more to the music that you are performing and composing in your video game music. But yeah, that's my little 2 cents for this week's video today. But of course, if you like this video and you would like to see more of it, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I love talking about these kind of topics where, yeah, we just talk about music and different concepts in music and all other types of stuff like that. So feel free to subscribe if you like this kind of content and you'd like to see more. But that's all I had for today. So otherwise, I will see you next time. Goodbye. Come and get your love. Come and get your love. This is uneven. I did not realize how hard it is to do an audible slurp. Okay, ready? Okay, we're good to go. Here's a hair on me. Oh my gosh, that was huge. That was a long hair on me. Okay, Pierre Boulez or Carl Heinz. I'm not gonna get, all right, one more time and then I'm just gonna push through it. But also there were other notable composers. Oh my gosh. I can't get through the sentence. Highly unlikely that that soundtrack will say that sounds lame. We're not gonna go with that. I don't like that. I need to drink this. My tea's getting cold. Okay, hold on. I'm not gonna chug this, but okay. I'm gonna leave it right here and I'm gonna drink the rest after I'm done.